Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name's Nishant, and I will be your host for the webinar. So the topic for today is successfully implementing Kanban with Portfolio and Upstream Kanban, and will be presented by Mahesh Singh. So let me just run through the agenda for today briefly. We'll do a quick set of introductions, followed by the presentation, and we'll end with a Q&A, and we'll try and take as many questions as we can. So the session is being recorded, and we'll take questions via the questions chat box. You'll see that in your GoToWebinar panel. It's usually on the right side of your screens. So enter your questions at any time, and we'll take them up at the end. Yeah. So just a quick introduction to Digite. Digite has been a pioneer in web-based collaborative products for geographically distributed teams for the better part of 2 decades now. We are headquartered in Cupertino, California, and we have offices in the UK and in India. We have nearly 1 million users spread across the world, and our products broadly cover Lean Kanban, Agile ALM, and product portfolio management. Swift Kanban and Swift Ease are our flagship Lean Agile products. So this is Swift Kanban, just a little bit about Swift Kanban. We launched it in 2011, and with a lot of support from the Lean Kanban community, I must add. We have teams across software development, IT, and DevOps, as well as functions like marketing, procurement, legal, and HR who use Swift Kanban. And we have some great visual portfolio management capabilities. You can track work across levels from the top right down to the intermediate planning and bottom operations and coordinations work that you want to do. You can also build hierarchies, and there's some powerful risk management capability that helps you balance your demand and capacity. We also provide a bunch of analytics, forecasting, and enterprise level metrics, and all of this comes built in. So Swift Kanban also integrates with about 60 plus tools in the ALM PPM space. The integrations are all real-time and bi-directional. You wouldn't have to disrupt your current way of working to start with Kanban and Swift Kanban at all. Here's a quick look at some of our customers. We have teams of 5 to 10 members using our products, and we also have organizations with tens of thousands of users on our tools. So pretty much all sizes, yeah. So that's for the introductions, and so over to you, Mahesh.
All right, thank you, Nishant, and let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
All right, so good morning, folks, and a warm welcome to the webinar today. It's nice to see, I recognize some of the names, and it's nice to see people joining from different parts of the world. And I hope that you will enjoy this session, which is really a tale of 2 approaches, and I will dive into that fairly quickly. So we have been implementing Kanban or Swift Kanban, our product, with our customers for nearly 10 years now. We have seen all kinds of companies implement Kanban, and they have had their own unique journeys to how they implement Kanban. Many of them, I would say probably a majority of them, have already been doing some level of Agile, and typically with Scrum or with some other methodology, and then they start to look at the next stage of their journey, and they come upon Kanban, they start to use that, or they start to implement that. And others who are possibly just getting started. It is surprising to see still a lot of companies just about getting started with Kanban, or with Agile in general. And so they have already heard about Kanban, and they are trying to see which is the best way for them to move forward, whether they should implement Scrum or Kanban. And of course, that's a whole other discussion about the fact that they are not really competitive to each other, but much more complementary. But irrespective, we have seen a variety of different organizations. And what we have seen is there are clearly a few that are succeeding with Kanban, and then there are those that aren't doing it so much. And so this is really understanding what those 2 types of organizations are. And clearly there are some that who continue to sort of be with Kanban but remain at a very low level of maturity. Whether they're using Kanban or in a physical way, physical board, physical cards, etc., or with a tool such as Swift Kanban. But predominantly using it as a work tracking, reporting type kind of a system. And then there are others, fewer in number, that quickly go up the maturity ladder and are able to really improve beyond their own expectations. And I think they really get Kanban. And so, looking at these two types of organizations that were, working with Kanban and also trying to implement Swift Kanban, we started to dig deeper and try to understand what they were doing, and this is really their story. Um, before I get started, just a little bit about me for those of you who may not know me. I've been with Digite. I'm one of the co-founders of the company, and I've been with them since the inception, more than nearly about 20 years now. And of course, when we started building Swift Kanban, I was leading the product management function at Digite. Currently, I run the marketing and the consulting functions. Uh, I've been fortunate enough to work closely with the Kanban community, and picked up a bunch of certifications along the way, and have been able to fortunately use them well in terms of our engagements with our customers. Just a little bit about me and my family. As you can see, we live not too far away from the Golden Gate Bridge, and that's my dog Tigger. Uh, I'm a bit of a foodie, and in particular, I like to try all kinds of meats from different parts of the world. And there's a picture there of my visit from to Brazil last year, and eating at a typical churrascaria there, and getting to sample different types of meats. And also, I'm a huge tea fan, and whether it is in India or especially in UK last year during a visit, trying out different types of teas, one of my passions as well. uh, Recently discovered this application called Smule. If you haven't found it, and if you are a karaoke singer like me, you would love to try that application out and sing with a bunch of people around the world. And Also, finally, of course, a little bit about my extracurricular activities. I like to ride a bike, and every now and then I get a chance to go around uh, here in the Bay Area, beautiful place for that, as well as, of course, longer trips. Anyway, so with that, let's get started on the main session, which is about our observation about the fact that many organizations tend to have a weak implementation of Kanban. And what do we mean by weak? So by weak, we mean typically it's a what many people would describe as a proto Kanban level zero maturity type of an implementation, which typically remains focused on the visualization aspect of it. And so you will have a Kanban board which is more elaborate than the simple to do doing done board. But in terms of the rest of the Kanban principles, implementation of WIP limits, implementation of policies, especially those policies that affect their interaction with their stakeholders, people who are around them, those tend to be a little bit weak. And pull as a concept, the Kanban is a pull system, and one of the key things that we encourage people to do is to implement pull, which means that team members must be able to take up the next piece of work when they're ready to do it, when they have the capacity to do that work. And that is a bit of a question mark with many teams. So many teams continue to operate in a more traditional manner where work gets assigned to team members, and the concept of pull remains a bit of a challenge for these teams. So this is really what we see with a lot of companies that implement Kanban, that they tend to remain at this level. Um, as a result, obviously, many of the problems that they were trying to solve with Kanban, they persist. And typically, of course, we've seen this in software development and IT, not so much of outside, because again, 60 to 70% of our customers tend to be software and IT organizations, and therefore we see the problem much more pronounced there. Um, and so problems that they were trying to solve in terms of helping Kanban implement and improve the flow, etc., they remain. So high demand, which is one of the biggest challenges that most software and IT face. We ourselves have the same challenge in terms of the number of things that we get requested to build in terms of our products. That high demand continues to expand. So in spite of the sort of implementation of WIP limits and controls, uh, the overall demand on the team continues to expand. As a result, the backlog management practices suffer. when you have a huge backlog and you have a ton of things that are being pushed into it continuously by your customers or by your support team or sales team, etc., uh, it continues to remain a challenge to really effectively manage the backlog, and that therefore continues to be a problem for these teams. Um, and then, of course, once you have a lot of work that's happening, clearly the issue of context switching becomes a problem or remains a problem for these teams, as you know, they get pulled from one important work to another important work. And then, of course, as a result of that, what you can expect is that there is an overburdening, and the dissatisfaction comes back quickly after the initial sort of euphoria or the excitement of Kanban sort of fades away. So that is sort of the environment that we see in these organizations where there is a uh, I would say a weak implementation of Kanban. So one of the other things that we see also is that, and this is something that was a bit of dissatisfaction for us as well, that we were not getting to interact with the people who were essentially running the organization. And it is that the leadership was also disconnected with the implementation of Kanban. So there was really no involvement or ownership of the Kanban implementation from a senior level. Uh, I'm going to go ahead and build up this slide. And as the result of the leadership not being engaged or not involved, potentially that resulted in insufficient funding, and as a result, insufficient training of people in the principles of Kanban, in the knowledge of the Kanban method, and potentially that was then feeding back to the team's poor implementation of Kanban. And in many organizations, like I said, Kanban is in most of Swift Kanban or any electronic tool, whether they were using Trello and then moved to Swift Kanban or Jira or one of the other tools, and and trying to use or trying to implement the Kanban method. What they were really doing was using it as a reporting tool to keep people updated, especially the leadership updated, but not go beyond that. And so we said we had to ask the tough question: that was Kanban also exhibiting signs of growing a butt? Many of you who are in the from the agile field would know the term Scrum butt, and that same problem perhaps was also happening with many of the Kanban teams. That if you ask them, "Are you implement Kanban? Are you doing Kanban?" They would say, "Yes, we are doing Kanban, but," and one of these challenges that you see on the slide here would then come out because they were really not dealing with the essence of Kanban. So we were a little bit disturbed by that. But at the same time, we thought there is hope because clearly we are seeing that Kanban is succeeding. Many organizations are succeeding with Kanban. And of course, there is a growing set of customers that we have and a growing number of organizations that are reporting successful implementation of Kanban. So clearly they were doing it the right way. There was some difference in the way that some teams were implementing it versus the way that these teams are doing it. And they were doing it better. They were succeeding with Kanban. So again, the idea was, thought was, what was it that they were doing? And as we started to engage with these organizations a little more closely, we saw that there were two sort of broad styles of engagement that we saw. And I'll go ahead and put these up here. The first type was where we have seen that as teams get trained on the Kanban method, they understand the basic principles of Kanban. They go ahead and model their boards. They start to then put their work on the system, and they're off to the races, so to speak. Sort of business as usual. There is another set of organizations that we have run into where they are not in so much of a hurry to do what they were doing, put it on the tool or put it on a Kanban board and start working. They spend a ton of time, and they spend a lot of time initially focusing on their own organization, and especially the board organization. The question that they seem to discuss is, how do we design and organize our boards? There is a lot of thought process that they were giving to this process, and the team that is doing it was the one that was engaging with us, and therefore we also became part of the discussion of how they were analyzing their own situation and how they wanted to truly implement Kanban. So essentially, they were doing a stock taking at this time, having perhaps been working with Kanban for 6 months, a year, maybe a couple of years. Now they were taking stock to see, okay, are we doing all the right things? Are we implementing Kanban the right way? And so that discussion was very specific to these types of organizations. Uh, so we also, again, in our observation mode, we said, okay, what are some of the ways that these organizations can be identified from the rest of the organizations, and what are they doing different. And so some of the early indicators of these engagements were the ones that I'm going to share with you. One was that there was a clearly sort of noticeable pattern about how the discussion was not just about the team that was in the room and we were discussing their work and their Kanban system. There was clearly either a top-down thinking in terms of I would say vertical thinking in terms of how they thought of their work, and there was discussion on aligning strategy to execution. So therefore, they were thinking of either a hierarchy of work which was directly a derivative of their own work, or they were looking at some organizational goals and strategies, and they're looking to see how they were uh, feeding to that goal or strategy. And so there was that vertical thinking or vertical design approach that was being implied. And the second was, of course, what I call a system, or what Kanban, of course, also called system thinking approach. That is, you're looking at not just your own work, but you're looking at an extended, if not the whole value stream of the work that you are part of in an organization. So this is clearly one aspect of the engagement. And the second was just the kind of companies these were. So clearly the companies that were this type 2, as I call them, were in a way better organized. They were different from the other organizations in this respect. Firstly, there was clearly a organization-wide focus on lean and agile, and not just necessarily in software and IT, but even outside of software and IT. There typically was a strong lean or agile center of excellence, which meant that there was a team of people involved in driving the initiative through the organization, and they were the people who were first coming to terms or first coming to agreement on how to do things, and then having that unified approach to implementing it in the organization. And more often than not, there was also some level of leadership involvement, even at early stages when we were there to train people on either Kanban or Shift Kanban. So these were some of the sort of early indicators of what these type 2 engagements were, where we were potentially seeing a better implementation of Kanban. And therefore, what we realized is over a period of our own analysis and across multiple customers is that they were leading rather than trailing. They were leading the implementation of Kanban with either Portfolio Kanban or Upstream Kanban or both. And uh, the session will talk about a little bit about what each of these means, or at least how we have seen these being implemented at our customers and how they have used them effectively to sort of involve the overall organization and therefore drive a better implementation of Kanban. So if you look at Portfolio Kanban, essentially everybody is sort of generally familiar with the portfolio management. It strives to align strategy to execution. And if you look at the traditional challenges of portfolio management, uh, we've been in the business of project and program management for the last 20 years, and we've seen a variety of different approaches to implementing portfolio management, whether they are portfolios of programs, portfolios of programs and projects, their portfolios of strategic initiatives, or maybe products and applications in a product or engineering organization. Uh, the discipline around managing these portfolios is always somewhat esoteric in the sense that a lot of people in the organization didn't really understand exactly what was being done or what is needed in portfolio management, which is typically, of course, a combination of a sort of what-if analysis around multiple dimensions, whether they are related to the financials or the cost/revenue related to these projects and programs, or it is about managing risk of doing something or not doing something. Uh, Directly related, of course, to planning of these projects and programs in terms of allocation of resources to one project versus the other, and the opportunity cost of doing or not doing something. Uh, so typically, portfolio management has been a complex space because it involves so many of these different dimensions, and typically has been the domain of a few people who are either part of the PMO or part of the CXO team, etc. And so, on a regular basis, the ability for organizations to propagate downwards and communicate all of the aspects of implementing a successful portfolio management program were always a little bit challenging. They were also highly data intensive. So, by that what I mean is, for portfolio management tools and portfolio management sort of processes to run successfully, it required a lot of contribution from project and product teams to make sure that your status of portfolios was updated, that you had all the right level of detail, so that the portfolio management could be also performed at that granular level of detail. It always made the exercise very complex, and as a result, uh, very often we saw that these portfolio management initiatives failed in the organization because they simply could not keep up with the overall requirement of providing all this data and then keeping it up to date and then keeping everybody informed and updated about the status of those different portfolio initiatives. And so, one of the big challenges that PMOs faced was keeping both not only the leadership actually, but also the teams updated on what was going on, and they were constantly struggling with this. They constantly struggled with this activity of managing portfolios of projects and programs in the traditional way. This is where, when Kanban has made an entry into these types of organizations, it has brought about a new way of sort of doing portfolio management, and in a far more simpler way. So, firstly, it provides a very simple and visual sort of interface. The one thing that Kanban does is it sort of it abstracts all of the different variables of managing your projects and products, etc., to two fundamental measures. One is lead time, that is the time to deliver something, and the second is the cost of delay if you don't do something or if you do something too late. Uh, these two principles really abstract all of the hidden sort of cost elements, or all of the hidden planning elements of the traditional project portfolio management, and therefore makes it far more easy to grasp and work with than the traditional approaches to portfolio management. And the other aspect, of course, is because it is visual, it is far more easy to track and communicate, uh, and it made it very much more attractive to organizations that are implementing this to be able to implement it far more effectively than otherwise. So it's a simple approach of top down work planning, work organization to drive organizational priorities. Typically, what we've seen is it is at least at three levels: strategic, planning and coordination, and execution. Something that some of you might be familiar with, and I'll just talk about that in the next slide. Uh, and it typically meant that there were some level of organizational initiatives in terms of implementing lean and agile, and therefore involved the overall organization. So it was not just implementation within a particular team or particular function, it was larger than that. Like I was saying, the two types of portfolio Kanban implementation that we've seen. One is, many of you would be familiar with the flight levels concept of that Klaus Leopold has espoused and started the Flight Levels Academy based on that. And that talks about implementation of strategy, implementation of Kanban at the strategy level and at the operational level, and a middle tier planning and coordination level. And I'm not going to talk about that in detail here, uh, but those of you familiar with the flight levels would be very familiar with that. And the second approach that a lot of our customers have taken is, without explicitly sort of talking about flight levels, they've inherently thought about their work in terms of work hierarchies. So they're automatically thinking of either portfolios, programs, or projects, or they're thinking in terms of a typical work hierarchy of themes, epics, or user stories. Or if it is something outside of the IT and software space, perhaps something like marketing, you might have something like themes, campaigns, or deliverables. So there is already and automatically a thought process around managing work hierarchies, and therefore the overall approach to designing the Kanban boards and implementing Kanban followed this thinking as well. This is just the Kanban flight levels for those of you who have not seen it, but please look up flight levels to learn more about it if you are not familiar with it. So in general, what Portfolio Kanban does is it is simple, vision, elegant, and it essentially allows you to do things very simply. Firstly, you can apply it. Basically helps you apply Kanban at any level, and this is something that Klaus talked about in a webinar that we did together a couple of years back. The beauty of Kanban is that you can really apply it at any level. So it doesn't have to be at the lowest operational level. It could be applied at the strategic portfolio level and at a strategic initiative level as well. And so you can apply it at any level, and so you can start from the top or from the bottom. It doesn't matter which way you go. You could have started right at the top to define a portfolio Kanban board, and define your portfolio initiatives being prioritized and selected for execution, or you start from the bottom and you move in either direction. So if you start from the top, at any point when there is more detail needed, you can decompose that particular stage of your workflow at the top and uh, expand it into a lower level Kanban flow. And similarly, if you had started at the bottom, for at any time when you wanted to abstract and provide a summary picture, so to speak, you could define a higher level Kanban. So if you were at the bottom, you could go upwards, or if you're at the top, you can go downwards. And that was very easily implementable with Kanban. Uh, some of the examples that we've seen, and I'll just share a few here to give you an idea of what are some of the things that we have seen our customers do. One of the key framework that we have seen is the OKR, or the goals, and then goals driving initiatives, and initiative then driving the rest of the work. This has been fairly common, and especially in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of this kind of implementation of Portfolio Kanban. So you start with a very simple board at the top, which is typically defining your overall goals for the quarter or for the year, and then prioritizing those and some of them, and then moving forward with some of them. These would then lead to some strategic initiatives that you might have. So that's sort of at the next level. Each goal may have one or more initiatives that drives that goal, and they could have shared goals as well. So you could have sort of many-to-many relationship between goals and strategic initiatives. And then, of course, at the lowest level, each of the initiatives then result in work being done by one or more teams, which could be modeled as different types of work, whether it is epics or other types of tasks and other organizations that you might have in your context. This probably was the most sort of common approach that we saw in the way that people thought about their work. If you look at it from a maybe a product perspective, you might have or sorry, from a marketing perspective, you might have marketing teams. Each theme then leads to campaigns, and this is actually a snapshot of our own board. Each team might have its own campaigns, and then within each campaign, you might have deliverables that lead to those campaigns being successfully completed. Just another typical example of a way that you can think of Portfolio Kanban being applied outside of software and IT. The idea was simple, that you have some level of, or some way in which you think about your hierarchy, and you're looking to model that very easily and simply using Kanban. So if you look at the way that you can define it in Kanban, it's very straightforward. Irrespective of the way that you define your Kanban boards, at the actual work item level, you can think about having different types of work, whether they are theme cards or campaign cards or different types of other deliverables that you might have. In this case, I'm looking at a mailer campaign that we do and we use internally ourselves. And you can define a hierarchy that lets you model your portfolios in this manner. You might have a more of a software development or a safe type of a framework, where you're looking at a four-level hierarchy of epics, capabilities, features, and user stories. Uh, those of you who are in the who are familiar with safe might be able to relate to this. So irrespective of where what kind of organization you work with, or what is your work context, it is easy to think about these hierarchies, because most work has some level of, some ability for abstraction or a roll up that can then be modeled using a Kanban board very simply and very easily. So in general, the modeling of portfolio management or modeling of portfolios using Kanban was straightforward. uh, and the second aspect of it was that, because of the focus on lead time performance and cost of delay, Kanban provides a far easier approach and a far more easy sort of framework to decide which of your initiatives to prioritize. So using some of the basic data that you collect in your Kanban system on a day-to-day basis, you can use that data to then understand what your overall performance capability is, and use that to prioritize work that you're going to do in the next quarter, next year, whatever will be the time frame in which you're looking at planning your work. So the ability for the Kanban system to enable you to do this data is really what makes Kanban so much more attractive because it focuses on these two performance parameters, that is lead time for delivery and the cost of delay. And here what I'm showing you is a few screenshots of how we capture this data ourselves in terms of our own work with building Swift Kanban product. But it also is showcasing the the Swift ESP product, which then allows you to do that kind of modeling. And there are many products out there in the market that let you do this by simply collecting your lead time or your cycle time data and your overall cost of delay data. And so you are able to very easily model this and understand when should you start things, how much can you delay things before it becomes too late for you to start things. It becomes very easy to do this using something like Swift ESP. So at an overall level, if you look at the benefits of Portfolio Kanban, firstly, at a leadership level, it provides immediate value because it gives them an opportunity to engage with the operations teams. It allows them to very easily and very visibly prioritize the key things that are important for them in whatever planning timeline, monthly or quarterly or annual, and makes it very imperative to both the leadership as well as to the team that the prioritization of things is critical, and that they are able to do it in a manner that becomes very visible to the entire organization. So it becomes very straightforward for the leadership to be able to do the prioritization. At the same time, it becomes very once the overall system is set up, where you have the higher level Kanban boards connected with the lower level ones, it gives the leadership a very clear view to the execution of how these initiatives are being executed. So it gives them that level of support that they needed, which they were not getting from traditional portfolio management systems, because now they have a directly connected hierarchy of work that they can see on a set of connected Kanban boards and understand whether a goal or a OKR is being actually driven or not with the actual work that's been defined below that. So in that sense, it very clearly helps them communicate to the rest of the organization what is it that they're going to do, what is it that they do, how what is the work that's important from a quarterly or annual perspective. Define some of the key aspects of how this will make them sort of fit for purpose, so to speak, and also how to do that, and therefore how is it being executed, how is the goal or the OKR being implemented because of the associated initiatives and associated work that's going on to feed that particular goal. At the team level, it helps the delivery organization clearly understand what are the sort of key bottlenecks in the system, and secondly, it helps them give them a proper context of why they are doing a particular type of work or why they're doing a specific set of initiatives or epics, etc. So it gives them the broader context and understanding of why they exist as an organization or as a team, and again gives them the broader context of what is it that they're doing. So at a sort of summary level, or to the leadership, it provides them an engagement model with the rest of the teams and gives them a very clear way to understand what is going on for the goals that they have set for the organization. And for the teams, it gives them the context of why they're doing what they're doing, and also gives them a clearer picture of, are they doing the most important things at this point. So this is really what Portfolio Kanban help the both the leadership as well as the operational teams with, and therefore gives them a greater buy-in to the overall process. And in general, I realize over the period of our observation of our customers is that even though they may not be at level 3 or 5 of the Kanban maturity model, but it supports that behavior and builds greater congruence between the different parts of the organization, and provides a better understanding to everybody of what is the work that they're doing, why they're doing it, and how it is being achieved. So that was really about the way that companies or organizations that were sort of doing that vertical thinking, the top-down approach to their approach to defining and designing Kanban boards. The second aspect of it, of course, is the overall value stream and overall system thinking approach, and that was facilitated by the Upstream Kanban capabilities. So, of course, Kanban encourages system thinking. We all know that, and as a general principle, you're looking at the overall system and trying to optimize the whole rather than doing local optimization. But the problem that we've seen with a lot of companies that have implemented Agile in the past and are now moving to Kanban is that they're very heavily focused on the delivery aspect only, which is typically the dev test cycles of a software organization or delivery stages of any other type of work that you do. And so when Kanban implementations follow that approach, they also tend to focus much more on the delivery, on the development aspect, and not the other, either upstream or downstream functions right away. And because their teams are sort of closeted into thinking that way, they continue that approach. Um, what essentially, of course, Kanban helps you, realizes that you need to be thinking beyond that. But if you don't, then you're obviously not realizing the benefits of Kanban that you're trying to get with the implementation of Kanban. Looking at who are the companies that have succeeded in this manner, these are teams that have not only looked at their own work, but they have also tried to get agreements with their stakeholders. Typically, these are people who are upstream, to the left of the board, so to speak, to the board that they're looking at. And these agreements could mean agreements in terms of how WIP limits are to be defined and what WIP limit they will implement so that their intake of work is manageable. It could be as simple as what level of detail and clarity they need in terms of the work they do. So if you're a software team, it might be agreement with your product owners and product managers, product management teams, that you need a certain level of detail in terms of the stories or the requirements that you're capturing in order to be able to effectively work on them. It could be the prioritization process. Um, it could be other agreements around the fact that what happens if something new comes along and you're already at your WIP limit. So in terms of replacement or substitution of work, what are you going to do? And also, are you going to discard work before it's too late, or are you going to abort work after it is started off and you already incurred cost on it? So these are some of the examples of policies that we've seen these teams who have been more successful implement with their stakeholders. And so there is already an effort not only to define the policies within themselves, but also in agreement with their stakeholders, which led them to have better understanding with the stakeholders, and in general, a greater attempt at managing their overall demand. Some of the other aspects of it we saw, of course, as they implemented Kanban, was just their better management of the processes and the ceremonies that they were using, such as replenishment meetings, and running these far more effectively. So in other words, uh, these teams were not just internally focused; they were looking at it with respect to where they exist in the overall organization or in the overall value stream, and they realized that they would not be able to solve the problem alone, and so they were setting these policies based on their agreements with their stakeholders. Um, and again, I've sort of already spoken about this. What this helped them do is have some of these tough conversations that you need to have about the overall demand of the team and what is the kind of work that is getting pushed your way. This is something that we have seen time and again, that in spite of the implementation of Kanban for many months, maybe even years, it is hard for teams to push back, whether it is their customers, external customers, or their internal customers, and be able to really forcefully have the discussion on what is it that they can and what is it that they are capable of delivering, what is their overall capacity to deliver. And Kanban's the teams that were upfront in having these discussions had, of course, a far more easy time than those who were approaching it at a later point in time. And again, because of the way that Kanban sort of collects the data and helps you understand your own system's capability and performance, you're able to have the discussion far more easily with your customers. And again, I'm showing you here the demand and the capability tabs that we provide in the Swift DSP product, which helps you look at your input inflow of work that you can see here. As you can see, the middle portion here shows you how the work flows in a system, and then what is the actual, based on what is your delivery cadence, how often are you delivering. You can also look at what is the delivery capacity, and then compare the two and really be able to see how well you are able to manage the demand that is being placed on you as an overall system. And this was facilitated, especially for the people who are focused on this aspect of having the discussion with their stakeholders and setting their own policies far more effectively. Uh, Not everybody was looking at this very, right off the bat. And so I sort of put down what was typically the stages of progression that these teams went through. Of course, this will vary from organization to organization and from team to team. But typically, you would expect that a stage one implementation would start with visualizing your own process and implementing your own sort of policies that are required for you to work effectively and manage your Kanban system effectively. But at stage three, very quickly, as if you were already sort of focused on that, you were starting to define policies with stakeholders and with customers, which would then guide you in terms of, or help you or support you in terms of doing your own work. Uh, in our own journey, as well as what we've seen for our customers, very quickly the need to visualize the upstream processes and the way that their work was being defined for them, that became quite clear. And therefore, the upstream process visualization, either on the same Kanban board or on different Kanban boards, came up. And then, of course, as it became more sophisticated, uh, upstream functions got into the fray, and they started to use Kanban as well, rather than just leaving it as a domain for the dev team or the delivery team. Uh, Again, I'm going to run through these slides fairly quickly. I just want to be conscious of the overall time. Um, this is our own journey in terms of the way that we started using Kanban as we were starting to build Swift Kanban. And as you can see, in the very first stage, it was our Kanban board was also very focused on just the dev aspect of our system and our own activity. Uh, we started with, of course, basic visualization first, and then we implemented, WIP limits and basic policies around how we're going to do our development work. And beyond that, we then started to look at what are some of the policies that we had to implement with our stakeholders, which meant our own management team, our own sales team, etc. People who are essentially, requesting new work. And these are some of the examples of how we implemented these policies with our stakeholders. So, for example, one of the most sort of commonsensical things that one would expect to see, maximum of 10 cards or 10 user stories in this case, or 20 cards in a ready queue as a simple definition of policy, so that you can then prevent new work being forced into the system. An 11th story would need to replace one of the already existing 10. So as soon as this became a clear understanding with the upstream functions, whether it is sales or marketing or support, etc., who are requesting new work, they knew that they had to first look at the 10 that already were there in the system. And therefore, it became harder for them to push in an 11th one, uh, uh, because they had to make a choice. No substitutions once the user story had started. So once the dev team had started to work on something, there would be no substitutions for that story. That is clearly a practice we see in almost any customer that has implemented Kanban. And then, of course, we had certain minimum norms defined for how product management would define work so that the dev team could work on it, whether it is in terms of functional specifications or it is UI or other aspects of the user experience. These all became part of our own policy definitions and how work would come into the system, and became agreements between the dev team and the product management team. And so you can see that as this started, we then moved forward to the next stage, and you can see this is our 2.0 version of the board, where we had a separate planning lane in our own in the same Kanban board, which became the place for where our product management team would work and detail out the work. And so this became the next stage of evolution for our own system. And in stage 5, we completely separated it into a different board altogether, and had a very elaborate board. At one time, we probably had too elaborate a board, where we tried to define all of the different types of things that we're working, from general ideas to things that are table stakes, catch up with competition, differentiators, hygiene factors, etc., etc. So you can see that we went through a fair bit of upstream analysis of our own work and tried to model our Kanban board based on that. Today we have a board that looks fairly different. I don't have a screenshot of that here, unfortunately. But just to give you an idea of how we sort of moved upstream, so to speak, and how we see this same thing happening with our customers time and again, that they start to have their upstream functions also involved in uh, visualizing their own work and connecting the two systems, so that there is a smoother flow of work across the entire value stream. So typically what we've seen and what we've seen our customers realize is that you start off with the focus in the dev, but really the upstream is your sort of bigger challenge. So just a simple visualization of that. Typically we've seen Kanban historically has had a strong sort of focus on dev and ops, but it is really the upstream that is the bigger challenge. And this is where, especially in the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of focus by our customers to get those processes also visualized on Kanban systems, and then really dig deeper into how to manage their portfolios, how to manage their prioritization processes, how to make sure that ultimately the work that comes to the dev team is the right work at the right time. So just a simple visualization of that. So upstream Kanban essentially gives value or gives voice to the product management function, which is one of the sort of critical functions in any product organization, any type of a company which is into in building products, and it gives them the ability to sort of talk about the complexity that goes into defining their work. Anybody who's here and who's worked in product management functions would relate to this, that it's such a challenge to get all the stakeholders in agreement and get the right set of things prioritized, and to get them then uh, defined in the right level of detail, so that you can have the dev teams sort of working smoothly. It needs collaboration with stakeholders further upstream, with leadership or with customers, and of course it requires collaboration between product management and the dev functions or the downstream functions. uh, and again, like I said, it is really critical to ensuring that the right stuff gets to the dev team at the right time. And you want to minimize waste, minimize aborts and discards, minimize the abort, especially which is work that is started. You don't want to cancel that any further. You maximize discards, which is work that is you decide to not do it anymore while it is still in the upstream stages of your overall Kanban system. And again, those of you familiar with the two-phase commit concept of Kanban, again, I won't go through that here. It facilitates that so effectively. In general, of course, for the delivery team, it helps them establish the policies that they want to establish, and it gives both sides, the upstream as well as the downstream, a far greater collaborative environment in which to respect the sort of mutual policies, and to make sure that the overall flow of work is smooth from upstream to downstream and throughout the overall value stream. And as a result, what happens, of course, is that both sides become far more invested in Kanban, and therefore you see a far more sticky version of the way that Kanban gets implemented. So, in summary, sort of just winding down the overall context of both portfolio and upstream Kanban, is that I think organizations that have implemented both of these have sort of benefited from the overall impact of Kanban. That is overall uh, promise of Kanban. It results in, like I said, lasting Kanban initiatives. It helps these companies really benefit from the overall implementation with a greater clarity of purpose. Gives them a deeper understanding of the Kanban principles. And I think that is one thing that we've seen, especially in larger organizations. We've seen many of the teams that don't have the same benefit that maybe the early teams had in terms of training on Kanban method, that they don't have that level of understanding. And in organizations that have implemented this, there is a far greater understanding of the fundamental principles of Kanban. And uh, again, one of the things that perhaps some of you may have seen is that typically when Kanban is implemented, there is a champion who's the Kanban enthusiast. Uh, as long as they're there, Kanban sort of flourishes in the organization. The moment they leave, it goes away. And our belief is that, based on what we have seen from our customer experience, is that if you have done it the right way, and if you've got a deep implementation of Kanban, then the departure of one or two individuals doesn't affect you. You already sort of seen the benefit that you can get from Kanban. The other big thing that it, of course, does is it gets the leadership more involved. And obviously, once leadership is involved, there are several sort of benefits that come from there. Firstly, because of the greater understanding of the benefits to the overall organization, there is typically a greater support for it. There is greater funding for it, which then typically leads to greater knowledge and training and other investment that you need in order to be able to implement Kanban more effectively. So just a couple of slides on how some of our customers have benefited from Kanban. And this is a great quote that is shared by one of our customers, Louisa Labs. Magazine Louisa is I think the second largest retail organization in Brazil, and Louisa Labs is their technology organization, and they have implemented Kanban, probably one of the best implementation that we have seen of both lean and Kanban. And this is not just in the product organization, in the tech function, but in the entire organization. And so this is a code that their director of planning and strategy, Leila Nakashima, shared with me. Uh, and this is especially relevant in the recent times where everybody has had to reorganize, retool, rethink about their overall, objectives, and see how to sort of survive these current challenging times. And so she said that because of the implementation of Portfolio and Upstream Kanban, they were really able to very effectively make the changes, bring about some dramatic new initiatives, and be able to ride these troubled times far more easily than if they did not have this. And they have probably one of the best implementations of Portfolio Kanban and Upstream Kanban that we've seen. So great sort of insight from her here. Another customer of ours who has not done so much of Portfolio Kanban as in terms of sort of strategy to operations, but they've implemented Upstream Kanban in terms of their product management function. Uh, they shared a great experience, which is that because of the implementation of Upstream Kanban, their ability to get the right things to their dev teams and at the right level of detail, especially I know this because I have been involved in their implementation, that the dev team struggled with getting clarity in terms of the work that they were doing, in terms of the functionality that they're supposed to build. And as a result of having implemented Upstream Kanban, they were able to not only, of course, define some of the policies in terms of WIP limits and amount of work that needed to come in, but just in terms of the different types of things that the product owners had to do in order to uh, make sure that the work was detailed enough for them to be able to work on. And as a result, their own flow, their own cycle time performance dramatically improved by implementing the Upstream Kanban function. Yeah. So just a couple of quotes here to help you understand how effective both Portfolio and Upstream Kanban have been in terms of really driving change, which was far more sticky at multiple levels of the organization, not only at the management level, but at the operational level, not only the delivery team, but also the upstream functions of the organization. And of course, upstream is relative depending on where you are in the organization. It helped the overall value stream, overall functions involved in the overall value stream to become far more effective in the way that they manage their work and the way they implemented Kanban. So hopefully this session firstly helps you understand how you might implement Portfolio Kanban or Upstream Kanban in your own functions, in your own organizations, and how and why they are more effective because of the fact that they get a greater part of the organization involved right off the bat. And in general, the sort of lessons for us have been that as you're starting to implement Kanban, if you think about these aspects of your work, and also try and uh, implement Kanban in these aspects as well, whether you call it portfolio management, whether you call it product management, whether you call it any other name, that helps you understand the context of your work and helps you define that work for your teams. It becomes far more effective, and it gets a far bigger part of the organization involved in the implementation of Kanban. And that, I think, is the recipe for a far more successful implementation of Kanban. So with that, I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions.
Hey, great session, Mahesh. We do have quite a few questions. While you scan through the ones that have come in, during the session, I'll just quickly go through the ones that were sent in during when registrations were open. Yeah, we have about 6-7 minutes. So we had a question that came in earlier that basically asked how you get the entire picture. And he goes on to say, visualizing all the different levels is challenging. And frankly, we struggle with it quite a bit, what with all the disparate teams, portfolios, etc. So what's your take on that?
So two aspects of it. One is, of course, the fact that yes, it is depending on the overall size of the teams, the size of the organization, you can get some pretty large sort of portfolio set of Kanban boards, and it can be challenging to visualize that all together. And there are different tools that provide different levels of support. If you are using a electronic tool for managing a portfolio Kanban, there might be different facilities that those tools provide. We have our own, and we believe they help quite a bit. But of course, in spite of that, we know that sometimes it can get pretty challenging. One of the key things that we have seen discussed quite often is that what is the level of abstraction that you implement at any level of any at in a Kanban board at any level. So there is always the struggle to have the right level of granularity so that you have the right optimal number of cards, let's say, not the right number, but an optimal number of cards moving through any board. And if you have that principle well sort of implemented at any level of the Kanban board, whether it is at the portfolio level or at the operational or at the middle planning level, uh, you should typically have a easier time visualizing all of the scope of a portfolio. But clearly, I empathize with you. There are no easy answers to this. But again, we have seen some very elegant implementations of portfolio Kanban, where really the fundamental benefit that the teams get is to be able to understand what is the context of their work, why they're doing it, and from the leadership perspective, how is a particular goal, how is a particular initiative being executed in terms of the lower level of work that is being done. So perhaps one of the things to also look at is to not try and visualize the entire thing, because it just gets too big and too challenging for anyone to do. But it might be to focus on specific hierarchies and look at each hierarchy independently. And of course, then there are aspects of dependencies between teams and between different initiatives and different types of work being done. Again, you have to visualize the dependencies in some manner, and again, tools are there to provide you help with that. Uh, but I think that the focus on one, the sort of hierarchy in question, the hierarchy that is being discussed at a time, if you can visualize that well, I think that solves a lot of the problems that you might be potentially facing. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Mesh. So we have a couple of questions from Thibu. He's referring to slide 43 of your presentation. So he asks, have you any measurement of to what extent the situation of advanced Kanban companies have improved?
Aha, question about overall improvement. Let's
Yep.
see if I can go back to slide 43 here. Apologies for that. Let me just, I'm not sure if it's this one or this one. Uh, so in general, what is it that organizations are trying to improve, and what is it that they're measuring, right? So ultimately, the level of abstraction determines what level of Kanban board you're looking at. And at that level of the Kanban board, your uh, basic measurement that you're taking is your cycle time of delivery of work, whether you call it cycle time or lead time, and whether it is focusing on specific parts of a value stream or looking at extended value streams. The ability to firstly accurately measure the value stream or measure the cycle time depends on the way that you define the boards. So typically, if you have, let's say, a hierarchy of themes, epics, and user stories, let's say, yes, let's take a simple example, then you could be looking at the cycle time performance or lead time performance at the user story level, which is got perhaps at their own Kanban board, or you could be doing it at the epic level, or you could be doing it at the theme level. So firstly, just to be able to get a clear picture of what is your cycle time performance or what is the lead time performance, you can look at the right level in order to make sure that you're getting you're focusing on the right measure or right aspect of your work in terms of the measurement. In terms of what is the kind of improvements that we have seen customers get, I think the numbers range quite a bit, vary quite a bit. But what we have seen is that initially there is a very dramatic improvement. We've seen people code even 200 to 300% improvement in terms of cycle time. We have ourselves seen some pretty dramatic improvements in our own release capability, in our own cycle time performance. And some of those come right upfront from implementing the basic Kanban principles of WIP limits and flow, and focusing on flow and improving your practices around multitasking and so forth. The greater you're able to tackle things like dependencies and blockers on your board and reduce those, or to make sure that your teams finish what they started before taking up new things, those basic principles lead to some dramatic improvements in the delivery of your work. As teams start to get mature, there is some level of plateauing that happens. But I think overall, as at least in the first maybe 3 to 5 years of implementation of Kanban, which is typically where we've been involved, we continue to see improvements in one function or the other, whether it is cycle time performance, whether it is flow efficiency, whether it is throughput, etc. You have various measures in which to do it. Certainly, the measurements, the improvements are more dramatic earlier in the implementation. Over a period of time, things tend to settle down, and therefore perhaps the rate at which teams improve may not be as great. But again, the experience varies from organization to organization.
Great. I hope that answers Thivu's question. So, Mahesh, we'll maybe take a couple of more questions. We've already crossed the allotted time.
Sure.
So, yeah. So, Dionia asks, a discussion that is very common in the Kanban community is that you need to work to meet a stable flow. So, how do you describe this flow in Upstream Kanban? And is a sign of if no sign of starvation, is that considered a healthy upstream?
So again, depends on the context. I think we have seen this discussion happen multiple times. Firstly, I think when we talk about, so in Swift Kanban, for example, there is a feature called minimum WIP limit. So you can not only define a maximum WIP limit of how much work you can take on, but there is also an alert that lets you know that that you have too low inflow of work. Most people laugh at that because in reality, most teams face the challenge of having too much work, and they never have the problem of um, too little work. But yes, it is certainly possible that such a situation is possible. Um, it is, like I said, the challenge of uh, prioritizing, detailing, and ensuring that the right work is getting to the team at the right time is a hugely complex task. And I think most organizations don't appreciate their product owners and their product managers well enough to understand how much work goes in to get the team the work that they need to do in order for them to do it without any further interruptions. And so the ability for teams to implement Kanban in the upstream stages, and to make sure that the work that is coming to the delivery team is the right work at the right level, is of utmost importance to organizations. And I think the ability for uh, upstream functions to get stakeholder agreement and uh, ensure that the the decomposition of work has happened to the right level. All of that is a challenge that has to be met head on. I think the implementation of upstream Kanban as part of your overall Kanban initiative has to be there right from the start. And you might have tooling that helps you with that process, but ultimately the ability to get people to agree on things is still a very human, a very personality dependent aspect. And of course, uh, a lot of organizations are very well organized around that in terms of the sort of um, capability or the power they give to their product owners, and help them sort of get that level of agreement. And not sort of suffer from the hippo, highest income, highest paid person's opinion matters, so to speak. But to really get stakeholder agreement on things that are really important to the organization. Uh, but it is still a struggle for many organizations. So you're right that uh, having that upstream process stable definitely is very important for meetings, overall stable flow requirements or conditions. And the earlier you do it, the better it is. Hopefully that
Great.
answers the question.
So let's end with this, Mesh. So it's a question from Yishan. So he asks, what have you seen that worked well to get upstream prioritization done efficiently, especially with the engagement from multiple leaders? When you have Scrum teams that serve multiple leaders, how does it all work? Do you have a separate board for each leader, or do you combine them all?
Um, well, we have, I don't know that we have seen separate boards for separate leaders, but it is certainly possible. I don't know the exact extent of the organization. I mean, the way that your upstream is organized, but there is no hard and fast rule. As you know, Kanban doesn't specify any particular norm. So the best thing I can say is that you start with what you do today, which is if you do have different leaders in the organization providing different levels of detail or different types of input, you might think about having individual boards to help each of those leaders themselves understand what their flow is, and therefore have multiple of these upstream boards. In general, what we have seen is that there is, for a delivery organization, for a delivery function or a team, there is one upstream Kanban board. That upstream Kanban board might have multiple swim lanes. That's how we think about our Kanban boards. And each swim lane might have different sources of those demand, or different sources of that upstream work. So you might have, for example, in our own context, we may have work that has been requested by marketing or sales or support as different swim lanes, so that people all over, whether it is the upstream people or the downstream people, for them it is very clear what is the where is the source of the demand and what is the nature of the demand. uh, but to start with, it could be possible that you might, set up a individual upstream board for each leader in the organization, and then figure out a way to make it simpler. Because ultimately, it is also a matter of how easily can your team that's actually going to do the work, how easily can they pull work from these different boards or different sources of work and manage them effectively in their own delivery board. So how you organize your Kanban board is definitely a very interesting and complex topic, and that's where, like I said earlier, a lot of teams spend their early time. You may organize boards by teams, by products, or by different services that you provide, and accordingly you might have different choices to make in terms of your upstream Kanban board. But I would say, in general, for the delivery team, the lesser the number of boards, the more easy for them to manage. So. Really want to make it easier for them, as well as the people who are doing the prioritization work, to make it easy for them to also uh, uh, do their work more easily.
Great. So, Mike, we have quite a few questions on cost of delay, triage tables, clauses, flight levels, benefits of portfolio data. But I think so. We are way past the hour. So, folks, what we'll do is we'll take down these questions, and when we send you the recording of the webinar, we will answer these questions in the same email. Right. And for those of you who had questions regarding the tool, we will reach out to you directly.
Yeah, please.
So hopefully,
I was going to say that,
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
we feel free to reach out to us, and I'm going to share our contact information, which is there in the last slide here. I apologize for the fact that I might have run a little bit longer than I'd thought, but uh, I think the important takeaway for today's session, for those of you who are looking at these areas, portfolio Kanban or upstream Kanban, is that I think there is, I believe there is a strong correlation, if not actual causation, that if you're starting implementations, or even if you are already well past your initial implementations, these principles really help you get overall organizational buy-in as well as alignment of purpose. And therefore, it's important to look at these disciplines in more successful implementation of Kanban. I'd love to connect with you and to answer any questions that we have not been able to take up today. But thank you very much for joining today, and hope you enjoyed the session.
Great. Thanks, Manish. Thanks a lot. Thank you everyone for joining in, and stay tuned for our next webinar. Yeah, see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.